Excuse me, students and teachers. Savaya Butler, please report to the main office for dismissal. Savaya Butler, please report to the main office for dismissal. Thank you.
Yo.
Hi. Go tell it all. Let's see. Would help to be in the right class. Hi.
I can see like they want me out.
Yeah.
I have secrets. It seems like I'm worked out this a while ago.
I get it. I just took a nap for like 10 minutes.
I can do that.
Yeah, like 10 minutes is really not long enough, but
It's like a teaser.
yeah.
It's like
It's just like, ooh, I can't wait to go home and finish this in a couple hours.
You good with everything for it?
Sounds very confident.
Is this your instant pepper?
Yeah, it's just instant. It just actually looks terrible. Maybe I didn't put enough in it. Ugh. It's not good. It's just not a good option. But I brought the French press, but the cleanup is a nightmare.
Oh.
Can't deal with it.
Can I send you a message or cash out something? Memo? Yeah. You? Yeah, you can send to your.
No, that's the warning bell. What am I looking at? Huh. Interesting. Identified. Hi.
Hi.
How are you guys?
Good.
I'm just finished eating a bagel, so I'm good.
AJ, Maryland. I'll wait a minute and see if Victoria shows up. David is here in person.
Yeah, I have an orthodontist appointment today, so my mom just told me to stay home because it's during choir.
Makes sense. I feel like today should be Friday. I don't know what the deal is, but it just feels like a Friday to me. I feel like it's the end of the week. And then I realize we have to come and do this tomorrow too. Okay. Be turned this way for now. We'll do effect tomorrow. All right, I'll go ahead and finish attendance, and if Victoria shows up, I can change it. Okay, trying to decide what order I want to take things today, because I definitely want to talk about in cold blood, because we haven't talked about it all that much, except for the first bit. I think I'll first go through the other stuff. Modules. Okay, so the first thing, actually I will switch over here so that I can display this. Ooh. All right, so we've started talking about argumentative essays, and we haven't gotten an assignment to write one yet, and that's cool. We'll get our first assignment for one tomorrow, and it's not like an in-class essay. You'll have some time to work on that. But what I've posted, first of all, is this persuasion map, which honestly, I want to open it as a PDF instead of in Canvas. And this is just kind of a tool. It's even like fairly elementary, to be honest with you. But it's just really helpful. If I'm just thinking of, let's see, I'm trying to think of like a good topic to write a persuasion or like an argumentative essay about. If I were arguing that we should have a nationwide mask mandate, in the introduction right up here, actually, I'm not sharing my screen with you. That doesn't do a whole lot of good. Let me share my screen. Okay, so I just posted this in Canvas, persuasion map, and this is what it looks like. You can write some stuff for your introduction, just stuff that you might want to kind of touch on. So for instance, if I'm writing about the fact that we need a nationwide mask mandate, I might have an introduction that starts with a hook about like how we never thought that everywhere we went in public, we would see people with face masks, but that's kind of the new norm. Let me let Victoria in. I'll try to. There we go. Hey, Victoria, I'm just going over this thing that I just posted, which is a persuasion map. It's just kind of a useful tool to help you guys structure an essay, an argumentative essay. How did I do this before? There we go. So my example that I was using was if I was writing an essay that argued that we should have a nationwide mask mandate. In my introduction, I might want to kind of start with an anecdote about how, like, before 2020, we never would have thought that everywhere we went, we would see everybody else in public wearing masks, but that's just kind of the new norm. And we're doing it to protect each other. And then I would finish with a thesis about how we should have a nationwide mask mandate so that, you know, all of these reasons. And then when I'm thinking about what the reasons are, you can kind of do this before you even build a thesis, because it might help kind of organize your thoughts for a thesis. So we could think of like 3 main reasons, and I might not take the time to think of 3 right now, but like one main reason would be COVID doesn't transfer through most masks, and if both people are wearing a mask, then you're much more likely to be protected from COVID. So if that was my first reason, I would want to go down here and think of some examples. You know, if this is an outside of class essay where you have the ability to like look stuff up, you could even look up statistics as long as you cite them in your paper. You could talk about a personal example. You could even mention something as simple as like, if you sneeze with a mask on, which we've probably all done at this point, you're not going to get your germs on someone else. Another reason might be evidence. If we all follow the rules for a shorter period of time, sorry, let me rephrase that. If everybody follows the rules for a short period of time, it would be a lot easier to completely get rid of COVID. And some facts or examples in there, you could look at other countries that have done that and seen the mask mandates that they've put in place and the fact that COVID doesn't really exist for them anymore. So those are some things that just to kind of show you like how to build that. This is, like I said, it's pretty elementary. It's like an organization chart that we've probably all seen in some form or another, but it works really well for argumentative essays in particular, but honestly, you could use it for rhetorical analysis essays as well. Like if in the introduction, what's the last one y'all wrote? If your introduction was something about how Capote characterizes his view of Holcomb as like very wholesome and picturesque, you could kind of have these main reasons down here, and then you could use examples from the text that support what you've said, like what quotes would make it sound really wholesome, what quotes would kind of play into its being picturesque. And then down here at the bottom, you can kind of start formulating your conclusion. So how can you tie these things back together without directly restating what you said in your introduction? Is there anything new that we can take away from it? So that's a really good tool to use. Like I said, for argumentative essays, but really you could use it for any type of essay. We can kind of revisit it when we look at synthesis essays. I think synthesis may be the hardest to use with this, but maybe not. But since we haven't really gotten into synthesis yet, I don't want to like focus on that too much. Okay. So this next thing, the other day when I was out, you guys should have read The Family That Stretches Together, which of course is not, every time I sign that, I forget for a minute what it's about. And I'm like, is it talking about a family that exercises together? No. It's talking about like blended families, extended families. a lot of people now have families that are not like the core family that we think of, not like mother, father, daughter, son. People are being raised by grandparents. People have parents who are divorced and they have two step parents, step siblings, half siblings. It's the idea of like a normal American family is a lot more nebulous than it was, 50 years ago. A family can kind of look any kind of way now. So it's a really interesting article and I think really relevant for now. What I'm going to ask you guys to do with it is a little bit of a challenge. If you look at the assignment, you're going to formulate your own prompt for an AP exam style question using your knowledge of the ones that we've answered before. And you can certainly go back and look at some of those. It's kind of up to you. You can choose to do a rhetorical analysis prompt or an argumentative prompt. So like if we were looking at this essay, you could either choose to like set up a rhetorical analysis essay for it or an argumentative essay. For either one, whichever one you choose, you're going to write your prompt and then make a short outline that includes a thesis of things that you'd write about in an essay response to the prompt.
Pardon the interruption. I need Madison Rivers for dismissal, please.
So you're just writing the stem and the list. You're not attempting to write a full essay on this. You can go back and look, or I feel like at this point we're a lot more familiar with rhetorical analysis prompts. But you can go back and look at either the assertion journal prompts or from, I guess it was Monday, we did look at the argumentative prompts about creativity. Should there be a class just focused on teaching creativity? You could go back and look at that. In fact, let's go back and look at that for just a minute. So this is the last question. If we look at it, this one is definitely going to be, if you chose to do an argumentative prompt about this, it's probably not going to be as long as this one is. But you notice that it does have information about the essay or article or whatever itself, first of all. So you probably want to kind of describe what the family that stretches together is saying, what it's about, what its argument is. And then the actual stem, the actual prompt here for this one, write to your school board explaining what you mean by creativity and arguing for or against the creation of a class in creativity. So kind of think about that and think like, how could you change that to be about the family that stretches together? And you can certainly look up past argumentative essay prompts to see how they're phrased. You can look back at the assertion journals, like to what extent do you agree with what the author's saying? Obviously, if you're going to do a rhetorical analysis, actually, let's just go back into this. This is, I don't think this is one we've looked at, but it's all right. We haven't looked at this one yet, but they all kind of say the same thing. In a well-developed essay, analyze the rhetorical strategies the author uses to make their point, advise their son, whatever. Support your analysis with specific references to the text. Almost every rhetorical analysis prompt is something like that. So what you're going to do, whichever one you choose to do, if you're looking at it from a rhetorical standpoint or from an argumentative standpoint, this bit is what you're writing. You're coming up with the question yourself. And then after you've come up with the question, you're not writing an essay in response to it. You're just kind of coming up with an outline. And you can even take a look at, I guess I closed it out. You can take a look back at the persuasion map and kind of use that as a guide to do your outline. You can have an intro. These are the 3 main points I'd make. These are some facts I can use to back that up. And here's how I'd wrap it up. This doesn't have to be super involved, super complicated. You don't even necessarily have to write complete sentences. It's more about, this is more about organizing your thoughts and figuring out how to organize your evidence so that it would be appropriate to make it into an essay. Does that make sense, what I'm asking you to do? Okay, so we'll probably have a little bit of time at the end of class for you to start working on that. But first of all, let me stop that and turn around. I do want to talk a bit more about part 1 of In Cold Blood, because we haven't talked about it too much yet, except for that first, 2 pages or whatever that you guys did the rhetorical analysis about. And I recognize I haven't graded that yet. I've definitely fallen behind on grading a little bit this week just because I've been sick or whatever you want to call it. But I will finish getting those graded either today or tomorrow. So you guys should finish reading part 2 by Tuesday. Is that what I said? I said that a while back. I'm just double checking because we never got the chance to talk that much about part 1. Yeah, Tuesday. So one thing that I want to ask you guys about, and you can just say it out loud, you can write in the chat, but I kind of just wanted to kind of get your ideas on some of the main themes that we're going to see coming out of this book. Here we go. And I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about is obviously, okay, so we know from the beginning who commits these crimes. We have these scenes that kind of interweave between the Clutters and what's going on in Holcomb and Dick and Perry and what they're up to. So we kind of get to know the killers well before we actually see the crime. We don't actually see all that much violence in part 1. We know that they die. We kind of hear about the crime scene, but just as a little spoiler alert, we're not gonna actually witness the crime until part 3, I think. And there's only 4 parts, but it's a little bit strange the way that he goes about it, the way that we sort of get to know the killers even better than we get to know the victims. And because of that, we might sort of sympathize with them even more than we sympathize with the people who were killed, just because, not that we don't sympathize with the people who were killed, but we just don't know them as well. And we really get a lot more information about Dick and Perry. I think we've sort of started to see some of their background a little bit. They ate dinner at Dick's parents' house, and they seem to be really good parents, really loving parents. We've learned a little bit about Perry. He's definitely had more of a difficult life. He's got something wrong with his legs. He's addicted to aspirin, which you just chews him up. It's so gross. So we learned a lot about their background. And I guess my question is, do you think that kind of stuff, background, how you were raised, your childhood, that kind of thing, do you think that should be taken into account when when a criminal is like part of a trial? Should a judge or jury care about that kind of thing when they're determining how to punish a criminal? And you can say it or you can type it in the chat. Or to what extent do you think that a judge and jury should take a criminal's background into consideration?
If only if you have like mental problems, but if like in this case, they seem like they knew what they were doing and they were in a good mental state.
Yeah.
And
No, go ahead.
I don't think that they should. I feel like that's the only exemption. That's the only time where like a person's background should be brought up into it.
What about like if the person was like a victim of abuse as a kid or something like that, and just was never really taught how to behave?
I think that would play some factors into like how the person turned out, and probably like if it was like a case of like self-defense murder, I can see. But I feel like in this case, I don't think the background really matters.
Okay. Anybody else? Dave, were you gonna say something? Yeah. What David said is that they should maybe take into account, but it's not an excuse. Like, you don't get to just get a free pass because you didn't have a good childhood or something like that. Most of us do know the difference between right and wrong, with the exception, like Aria kind of mentioned, of people with actual mental issues like sociopaths, psychopaths. I don't think we're dealing with sociopaths or psychopaths when we're talking about Dick and Perry. I think they're, for the most part, pretty normal. In fact, it mentioned at one point in part one that Dick was like really smart. He like scored an IQ of 130 or something, and Perry kind of keeps insisting that he's the smarter of the two. Like, Perry definitely has a pretty high opinion of himself. Like, he talks about how smart he is. I don't know that he necessarily lives up to that. But particularly, like, we'll learn even more about Perry. Perry's definitely got some like messed up stuff in his background. But other than like being in, what was it, a motorcycle accident that Dick was in? Nothing really, there's not anything really wrong with him. Which is interesting because I think they sort of paint Dick as the like colder of the two, the less complex of the two, and Perry, which I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, like there are rumors, of course, that like Truman Capote had feelings for Perry, so he sort of like played into him a little bit more. But I think his character is a little bit more fleshed out, and it's weird to say character. He's not a character, he's a real dude, but we just learn more about him. What else did I want to ask you guys about? Well, we sort of were talking about that, like whether a psychiatric evaluation matters when you're talking about criminals. And obviously it does to a certain extent, because there are people who have like committed horrible crimes, but after a psychiatric evaluation, they don't go to prison, they go to a state mental health facility. And that, that happens because they feel like they can't be held accountable for their crimes. Like, they're not mentally like with it enough to be held accountable. But here's a sort of a bigger idea, like a bigger concept, do you think that people always have control over their actions? And if not, when do they not? Do people always have control over their actions? I think you're trying to talk, but you're muted because your square is highlighted. Any opinions? It's definitely. Oh,
Oh, and
sorry.
I was doing the dishes. What did you say?
Do you think that people always have control over their actions? And if not, when do we not have control?
I think people do have control over their actions, but there's sometimes like where like your mind is clouded with like things and moments like, and you just like your first instinct hits more than like the good parts of you.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase that. And I think that it's worth mentioning that the law recognizes that too, because you have what's called a crime of passion, which is basically like if you kill someone or whatever and it's not premeditated, you didn't plan it out beforehand, you didn't have any intention of killing someone, but just in the moment you like snapped and you got so upset that you did something that you would never normally do. And that's recognized a lot. And yeah, like that is like legally that holds a softer punishment than if you like planned out a crime. Like premeditated murder, that's first degree murder. A crime of passion is usually going to be second degree murder because you didn't have the malice and forethought to like plan it through. It was just heat of the moment. I think that that's kind of applicable to what you're talking about. Like sometimes your worst nature just takes over for a minute, and you feel like you don't have any control over it. Now, granted, most of us, when we lose control of our actions, aren't going to haul off and kill somebody, hopefully. But yeah, sometimes we all make decisions that immediately afterwards we're like, why did I do that? That was so stupid. And it'll be interesting to see, like, as you guys read this book, to kind of determine what you think was going on in Dick and Perry's minds when they did this. I think it's interesting it's always interesting for me to reread this because I've read it several times, but every time it's like watching a movie that you haven't seen in a long time. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot it happened that way. I think the way that this book is written is really interesting because they let us know right up front what happened and who did it, but we have no idea why. Like what inspired these people to brutally murder this family? Did they know them? Had they planned this? Do they know that Herb just took out a life insurance policy worth a lot of money? Because that was pretty incredible timing, actually. Like the day before he was murdered, he took out this life insurance policy that was like, had this stipulation that if he was murdered, then it would be double the money. That's pretty wild. But as they're traveling there and like they make these stops to get like stockings for their face, rope to bind them with, tape, I think. Perry's kind of always going back and forth of like, we need to protect ourselves, we need to cover our tracks, we need to make sure we're not recognizable. And Dick is the one that keeps saying, it doesn't matter because we're not going to leave any witnesses. So it's kind of like, it seems like he has the plan to make sure to get rid of this family.
Pardon the interruption, teachers. I need Lance Campbell for dismissal, please.
And besides that, it seems like it was kind of his idea in the first place. You know, he wrote to Perry, I think, and like talked about this score, is the way he keeps referring to it. And he wants to get Perry to help him because, number one, it's hard to probably kill a family of four on your own if you're just one guy. And second of all, Perry has kind of this reputation because when they were in prison together, Perry always talked about how he killed this guy by beating him with a bicycle chain. And so everybody knows, like, Perry's killed somebody before. Perry's a tough guy. And when Dick's looking for somebody to help him, that's who he thinks about. Perry, on the other hand, doesn't really seem to have, like, a reason to want to kill these people. He just needed a ride to Kansas. And since Dick was going, he was like, oh, okay, well, sure, I'll help you kill these people if you can give me a ride, because he was going to go meet his friend from prison, Willie J., and turned out he missed him. Willie J. was already gone, so kind of a disappointment. One thing that I want you guys to kind of keep in mind as you're reading is this is nonfiction. This is, you know, we talked about this is sort of the first example of a nonfiction novel. And for the most part, it does really read like a novel. Like, it's not hard to get caught up in the story, but it all really happened. However, while Truman Capote spent a lot of time with the townsfolk and with the killers themselves, there's a lot of stuff that he really did kind of have to like piece together himself. Like, we have all of these conversations between characters that, like the Clutter family, who were dead by the time Truman Capote came on the scene. You know, maybe he did hear that Nancy was helping that one person bake a pie, but he wouldn't have known like word for word what their conversation was. So while it is nonfiction, the narrator is really Truman Capote, and he's maybe not the most reliable narrator. So I just want you guys to kind of like approach it critically as you're reading. Make sure that, you know, you kind of realize that while he is giving us facts, he might be sort of painting them in a different light than they really happened. In the end, it doesn't change anything that happened, but it might change our perception of it a little bit. Like, for instance, the fact that he really does make us sympathize with Perry. You know, I think if we just read about the murder in the papers or whatever, we probably wouldn't sympathize with him because he helped kill a family of four, and that's horrible. But given everything that we learn about him through the lens that Truman Capote writes through, we do kind of sympathize with him. And you will even more after part two, once you learn about some of the messed up stuff in his past. But just kind of be aware of that as you're reading, that there might be kind of a skewed perception on some stuff. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I just want to give you guys the rest of the time to either read some of part two or go ahead and get to work on the family that stretches together activity. That's going to be due at the end of tomorrow. I'm going to just go ahead and let you know. I'm on the wrong week, sorry. Tomorrow, what we're going to do in class is you're going to get your assignment for the first argumentative essay that you're going to write, and you'll, after I explain it and kind of go through it with you, you'll have the class time tomorrow to finish up the family that stretches together thing and get started on your writing assignment. But if you go ahead and finish the family that stretches together thing now, you won't have to worry about it tomorrow. So those of you who are virtual, if you would like to sign off and work independently, you can do that. I'll be here for the rest of the time. So if you have any questions, just let me know.